This is not a single overnight operation. The military objectives that CENTCOM and the Joint Force have been tasked with will take some time to achieve, and in some cases will be difficult and gritty work. We expect to take additional losses, and as always, we will work to minimize U.S. losses.
It's World War III. It's Iraq 2.0. It's all Israel's fault. Israel. Oh my God. Greetings and salutations, everyone. My name is Sean, and recently there was a little bit of news that you guys may or may not have heard about, but since most of you treat me as your absolute number one source from breaking news, you're probably hearing this for the first time, and that is that the United States of America, along with Israel, has decided to launch strikes against the nation of Iran. Now, of course, in the course of these strikes, they ended up killing the supreme leader, Khomeini, and of course, they killed the second supreme leader shortly after he was announced as somebody being in that position. And obviously, the internet is ablaze along with half the Middle East due to the fact that these strikes happened, and of course, the usual suspects are blamed for said strikes. But weirdly enough, even though the Saudis were also lobbying for these strikes against Iran, it appears that the Saudis have managed to ghost all blame in this particular instance, and I think this is important for us to talk about today. What the Orange Man did, what's Israel's role in this, the Saudi role, the Iranian strike back, and of course, the reaction in the United States of America from all the pro-Iranian forces that happen to be embedded in our mainstream media. But before we get into that, I want to thank everybody who supports this channel via actualjusticewarrior.com/join.
Give me the money. Give me the money. Okay?
Our mission is to protect and defend ourselves and together with our regional partners, prevent Iran from the ability to project power outside of its borders and be ready for follow-on actions as appropriate. Across every domain, land, air, sea, cyber, the U.S. Joint Force delivered synchronized and layered effects designed to disrupt, degrade, deny, and destroy Iran's ability to conduct and sustain combat operations. This deployment included thousands of service members from all branches, hundreds of advanced fourth and fifth generation fighters, dozens of refueling tankers, the Lincoln and Ford Carrier Strike Group and their embarked air wings, sustained flow of munitions, fuel, supplies, all supported with command and control, intelligence, surveillance, and reconnaissance network.
So look, I gotta be perfectly honest with you guys out there in the audience. I've been having a lot of fun with this breaking news as of late, and this is because the reaction from people is essentially exactly what I was expecting. But we need to get serious for just a moment right now, and I will point out the obvious that yes, there is a chance, there is a possibility, if this becomes a prolonged conflict, that this is yet another disaster in the Middle East, and this would be an incredible stain on the evil bad Orange Man's legacy. So yes, in a certain respect, this could go horribly wrong, and I think we should all understand that possibility. We should all understand that reality, and we should all understand that the evil bad Orange Man didn't actually even sell the American people on these strikes prior to engaging in them. And in fact, if you looked at polling prior to the strikes, the American people were a clear majority against them. However, after the strikes and the word spread that the United States ended up taking out the supreme leader of Iran in less than a day, the polling was incredibly positive, which goes to show you guys out there in the audience that the American people do not have an ideological position on foreign entanglements. They seem to like the idea that if we do something and something good happens quickly, that is a W on the board for the United States of America. And a perfect example of this is Venezuela. Most Americans were against striking Venezuela, but when they heard that we managed to capture Nicolas Maduro in like less than 2 hours, that ended up leading to a lot of people supporting the operation because in general, the general population just wants win. They worry about loss. The prospect of loss is bad, therefore they're against that, but prospect of victory is good. So we're going to set aside generalized public opinion for just a second, and of course point out some of the realities on the ground. Hey guys, editing Sean, and as of right now, we're getting reports that 3 American service personnel have been killed in this particular operation. I don't know which country they were in, whether or not they were actually participating in the attack, or they were in a base in a surrounding Arabic nation, because because multiple Arabic nations have been attacked by Iran after the attack on them. So yeah, as the death toll ends up rising, there's going to be a lot of problems and a lot more hell to pay for the Orange Man, because unlike the Maduro operation, which had no casualties, this is something that the American population is not going to be that forgiving of. So yeah, just monitor this particular number. As it grows, people are going to get angry, and deservedly so, because again, there was not the convincing in this particular operation that we even saw for the disastrous operation in Iraq. So even if it goes well, people are not going to feel like they were consulted in this operation. So first things first, Iran, much larger than Iraq in terms of their population. They have a much more sophisticated military than the Iraqi military. That does not put them on the same level of sophistication as the United States military. But if you find yourself in a potential counterinsurgency situation, which by the way, we found ourselves in while we were engaged in Iraq. By the way, part of that counterinsurgency was paid for and sponsored by the Iranian government. Then yes, you could end up losing a lot of blood and treasure in these particular conflicts, and everybody who's worried about that, absolutely 100% to the extent that they're worried about that, are justified in that concern, because it's something that I also worry about as somebody who is not as non-interventionist as I was when I was 19, but still understands those arguments and the reasons and rationale behind that. That being said, obviously the Iranians have started to align themselves with the Russians, which did not pay off well for them, and of course the Chinese. The majority of their oil exports end up going to China. I believe they represent something like 15% of the oil imports of the Chinese. So yes, there is a strategic interest, if you're the United States of America, in trying to cut off Chinese access to supplies. This is something that was quite similar to the interest that was expressed related to the nation of Venezuela. So this is the American interest, not to mention the fact that Iran is a chief rival of not only the Israelis, but the Saudis, and the Saudis are part of our strategy in order to secure oil in the Middle East. They also keep oil trading in US dollars, which benefits the whole of the American population. And the Iranians, the Shia Iranians, are definitely 100% the top enemy of the Sunni Muslims in Saudi Arabia. Now, of course, you also obviously have the Israelis. The Israelis find the Iranians to be their chief rival in the region. They sponsor a bunch of groups that attack Israel, like Hamas, like Hezbollah, like the Syrian government that was recently overthrown and, by the way, replaced by a former head of Al-Qaeda, which, again, probably not the best thing. But, you know, the Muslim world is in fact the Muslim world, so what do you even expect? But of course, this has led a lot of people into celebrations if they happen to be of Iranian descent in the United States of America, and it also leaves me personally in a bit of a pickle, because I, after finding out that one of my friends' families ended up coming from Iran after they fled the Ayatollah because they were Shah supporters, had taken up the position that I was in fact a Shah supporter. I did so as a meme, I did so as a joke, only to discover later that there are actually Shah restorationists, and this is a major movement, which of course leads me to the point where I have to decide whether or not I'm going to hold on to my joke position, or I'm going to have to actually formulate a new position, and I've decided to hold on to the joke position. So all hail the Shah, the king of kings, the one true ruler of Iran, the man whose dynasty actually predates Islam, even though this Shah family's dynasty definitely doesn't, because we absolutely love the Shah over here on the Actual Justice Warrior channel. But again, I'm just kidding, guys. Everybody relax. I understand that this is incredibly serious. There are fears that this could spiral out of control into an Iraq. This could spiral out of control into a World War III. There are also a bunch of people who make a lot of money demagoguing this particular issue, saying that it's going to spiral into those particular things. But what I do want to say to you guys out there in the audience is that there is a chance, there is a possibility, based on the fact that the evil Orange Man does not want prolonged conflicts, that this doesn't actually spiral out of control into either of those things. Because the fact is, it's not 2003 anymore. We are not invading countries in order to install democracies. It seems like what the goal of the Trump administration is to do is to actually get nations that are supplying critical resources, in this particular case, it is oil, to the Chinese, off the board, so that way their long-term military strategies can be choked off by the United States of America. And by the way, if you're familiar with the book The Prize, which is all about oil throughout the history of the world, then you'll understand this strategy and how useful it was during World War II, during World War I, and throughout multiple different conflicts that we've seen across the world, again, based on nations launching said conflicts without actually defensible supplies of oil. Now, like I said, there are a ton of people that are obviously celebrating this, very similar to the people that were celebrating the raid and capture of Nicolas Maduro that happened to be of Venezuelan descent, and this is because if you end up leaving a country, or your family ends up leaving a country due to an oppressive regime in said country, you're very likely to end up supporting the overthrow of that oppressive regime, or the regime that displaced your family, whether or not it's better or worse than the previous one. Now, obviously, the Shah, being the king of kings, is in fact the true ruler of Iran, is the true ruler of that nation for all of eternity, and deserves to be on the peacock throne. But yeah, we can expect a bunch of people that are of Iranian descent outside of Iran in order to celebrate this particular instance. But with the people that are in Iran, it's obviously going to be a bit more complicated than that, because you just had a popular protest movement that popped off in that nation not too long ago. And while a lot of people speculated that was like a CIA color revolution, or that was the Israelis, and in fact you had people suggesting inside of Israel that they were behind that popular uprising, the fact is the US and Israel were not in a position to launch attacks that coincided with those demonstrations. So now that we have seen that it's pretty easy for the United States of America to kill off the supreme leader of Iran, and they probably could have done this at multiple different points, you realize that, oh, wait a minute, that uprising was probably not something that they had planned for, because if they were coordinating with it, we would have seen maybe this coordinated attack along with those protests. So yeah, my thoughts do go out to those Iranians who ended up being killed by the regime during that protest. Again, it seems like their biggest crime, their biggest fault is that they were out there in the streets too early. And of course, now we're in a situation where who knows what might happen, but you have between 5 and 30,000 people that could have been leading up the inside the country kind of protests that are no longer with us, again, depending on what reports about the levels of execution that occurred of those protesters from within Iran that you actually believe. That being said, we talked about earlier on how this could go bad, how it could end up being a debacle in the Middle East. Again, that is always a possibility in that region. However, there's a flip side of this, which is there are arguments about why Iran is different from Iraq, different from Syria, different from Libya, and those differences are not differences that make intervention worse. They actually make it potentially better. So we all talked about how they have a bigger military. Obviously, they're better organized. They have a nationalistic population, which could or couldn't work against us because, again, they're very wary of foreigners. But the fact is, Iran is unique in that their population is actually less radical than their government. According to polling, only about 37% of Iranians are actually seriously religious. Most Iranians actually despise the mullahs. They despise that particular regime because it's incredibly oppressive. So they have a negative view of that theocratic style government. And again, Iran is actually one of the oldest civilizations / populations in the entire world, in that they have an identity that actually predates Islam. And if you read books on the nation of Iran, one of the things that you'll find out is that there's often conflict between Iran as it existed prior to Islam and the post-Islam invasion of that nation, and the conflicts and whatnot that, again, exist in that particular culture. So if, and this is a big if, you end up getting a replacement government in the nation of Iran, in reality, the chances of them being more radical Islamists than the current regime are incredibly low. And this is different from Saddam Hussein, who is a secular dictator, Muammar Gaddafi, who is a secular dictator, or Bashar al-Assad, who is a secular dictator that was governing a population that was much more religiously radical than the government that was being run by those respective dictators. Again, so there's a chance, there's a possibility, but the thing is, what you end up having to hope for in a situation like this, especially when you're targeting a bunch of people in the line of succession in the current government of the mullahs, is that you want to eventually get to the point where you have what is called a palace coup, which is forces within the Iranian government decide that it's their moment to take power, they end up taking power, and those forces are more friendly to the interests of the United States of America. And again, if this happens, then yeah, great, that would be wonderful, but we don't know if if that's actually going to be the case. And if it does happen, we don't know what the consequences of that is, because in reality, whenever you have a country that's wealth is basically fueled by oil exclusively, gold exclusively, diamonds exclusively, it's actually incredibly easy to maintain an authoritarian regime, because once you have control over that main resource, you can use the proceeds from that resource in order to keep who you need to keep in power paid, and that ultimately ends up leading to the longevity of your particular regime. So yeah, it's all maybes, it's all possibilities. Obviously, there's a bunch of different attacks that are occurring against neighboring Islamic countries. You had bombings by drone of hotels in Dubai, which, by the way, I ended up seeing people start posting negative reviews of the hotels, saying that, you know, the room was nice and everything, but they lack anti-air defense mechanisms. All great stuff, all hilarious. And of course, many people on the left are absolutely upset about this, and they have decided to tweet out a great number of ridiculous things. You had Rashida Tlaib describing the United States of America as they, again, separate from her, because she doesn't view herself as an American, because she puts Islamism first. Obviously not surprising. You had Ilhan Omar talking about how she experienced the horrors of war, again, not acknowledging that her father was actually a part of the oppressive military campaign that other people who were legitimately refugees were fleeing from. And of course, you had Cenk Uygur praising the Ayatollah, saying, oh, well, whatever you think about him, whatever you think about his oppression, he refused to yield to Israel, therefore, he's a good person. But my absolute favorite is, of course, from the press secretary of the Ayatollah. All those other individuals just saw him as a spiritual leader, Mehdi Hassan, who decided to tweet this: God help us all if we're about to see a repeat of the post-Iraq 2003 era, illegally invade a Middle East country, energize extremists, and then get predictable blowback terrorism in the US, Americans killed at home and abroad to serve the agendas of GOP presidents and Likud prime ministers. Now, Mehdi said this in response to an Islamic terror attack that happened in Austin, Texas, at a bar that's located on 6th Street. People are describing it as one of the most popular bars / clubs in the entire city of Austin, and that Islamist terrorist was wearing a Property of Allah shirt while he marched up and conducted this particular attack, and apparently had a Quran in the car, and he had Iranian flags at his home, despite the fact that this guy was an Islamic person from Senegal. But of course, in addition to that, this shirt that he was wearing was prominently seen on figures like Cenk's nephew, who decided to instruct people on Twitch on how to make bombs in order to be effective in doing terrorism. You know, just throwing that out there.
Again, that's a Shahed drone. Like, that's crazy.
Oh my God.
Bro, you really actually don't need, like I was thinking about this with, like, the Afghanistan, the Taliban, Pakistan fight that was taking place. And I was really thinking about this. You really don't need suicide bombing anymore. You know, because like the Taliban guy was like, oh, you have nuclear arms, but we have like suicide bombers. Like, we'll just blow up your country with suicide bombers. And it's like, you really don't need that anymore in drone warfare, right? You don't need that at all. Just make drones. Just, you can purchase them from, you know, you can purchase them in the online marketplace. Like, China literally sells like explosive ordnance delivery mechanisms that you can put to a DJI drone that you can purchase like at virtually no significant cost in comparison to, like, you know, sophisticated equipment that you need to put together. So I guess, like, you kind of, at that point, you're doing that for the love of the game, right? Like, you're doing suicide bombing just for the love of the game.
So yeah, needless to say, the left, and of course all these different various Muslims in American society, and even former Muslims, now stated atheists like Cenk Uygur, have decided to show us exactly who they are in their praise for Iran, and this is either due to religious alignment, cultural alignment, or of course just alignment against the nation of Israel, because these people are the primary Israel Israel first types. If anything benefits Israel, then therefore it's automatically bad and the fault of Israel, even though again, there are different reasons, although the Israeli factor is definitely a factor. They are a close ally of ours in the region. Make no mistake about it. We work close with them all the time. Yeah, but the idea that the Saudis get ghosted in this, the other Arab countries that are Sunni Muslim that don't like the Iranians get ghosted in this, ridiculous and absurd. But again, what do you expect? I mean, people are going off right now on Elizabeth Warren's former staffer saying that all Americans and Israelis are valid targets anywhere in the world, even though again, this is somebody who worked for an American public official, but this is where we're at and this is what we're going to expect. But overall, my predictions is that this likely won't actually turn into a more prolonged conflict, because we've essentially been gaslit into thinking that this is happening since 2003. Each and every time something pops off in the region, people go crazy. But the way the Orange Man likes to operate, it seems like he wants to do the things that he wants to do and then get out quickly. So we'll see how that strategy works right here. But of course, I'm going to be rooting for, now that we're already in this situation, now that there's no real backing out of it, that we get a better government in Iran. Like, we get a more friendly to the United States government. Maybe the Shah returns. Maybe he returns as a transitional figure. Not really my concern right now. But yeah, something better would be a good result of this. It would be nice if an American intervention didn't completely backfire. But yeah, that possibility is still there. And of course, I want to know what you guys think down in the comments below. As per usual, if you like the video, show them by leaving a like, subscribe for more content, follow me on the social media, support me via the support links in the description of this video. This has been me talking about the US launching strikes on Iran. Till next time.